Well, that's the end of that press conference in the Oval Office between President Trump and Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General. And we covered so many topics. I'm not sure I can even remember what was talked about from the very beginning, but we covered things such as those ongoing tariff issues between President Trump, between the US and other countries. And he did at one point appear to be firm on the position of the United States on tariffs, saying, I'm not going to bend at all. He also was asked directly about Canada during this meeting. He said, we don't need anything that the Canadians have. He added that he believes that Canada will be a great addition as a state of the United States. He also talked about Russia as well. He gave a little bit of insight into what he believes the next moves are. And he said at one point that he hopes that President Putin will accept that 30-day ceasefire agreement that was agreed between Ukraine and the US in Jeddah. Now, let's cross live and speak to our North America editor, Sarah Smith, who is at the White House. And Sarah, I know you were listening to some of what was said. An interesting take from President Trump on so many different topics. But let's start, first of all, with his reaction to the latest on a potential ceasefire deal between Russia and Ukraine. Well, as always, if you want to read more about that special Oval Office press conference, you can go to the BBC's website. There's analysis right now on exactly what was said between Mark Rutte and President Trump, and also some more analysis on those tariff wars between the EU and the US. Remember, the EU has basically threatened 200% tariffs on, the US has threatened 200% tariffs on EU wine if the tariff war continues. We have analysis of that on the BBC's website. Stay with me, though. I'm here with the world today after this short break. This is BBC News, The World Today, and these are the headlines. President Putin says Russia agrees to a potential ceasefire in Ukraine, but says an end to the conflict can only occur if what he called its root causes were addressed. His comments come as President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, arrives in Moscow for talks. President Trump says the signals are promising.
A lot of the details of a final agreement have actually been discussed. Now we're going to see whether or not Russia's there, and if they're not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world.
G7 foreign ministers meet in Canada for 3 days of talks dominated by Ukraine and President Trump's trade tariffs. And a brown bear, which had life-saving brain surgery last October, has emerged from semi-hibernation looking happy and healthy. Now, foreign ministers from the G7 nations are meeting in Canada following 7 weeks of rising tensions between US allies and Donald Trump over Ukraine and trade tariffs. The group of 7 ministers from Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and the US, along with the EU, convened in the remote tourist town of La Malbaie in the Quebec Hills for 2 days of meetings. Well, our correspondent Tom Bateman is travelling with the US delegation to the G7 and joins us now from there. And Tom, bring us up to date with what we found out so far about this meeting. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching The World Today on BBC News. An attempt to send replacement crew to the International Space Station to relieve 2 US astronauts who've been stranded there since June has been postponed. An issue with the launch pad prompted officials at Cape Canaveral in Florida to cancel the SpaceX flight only minutes before it was due to blast off. She got that joke in before me. I was going to say something about the bare necessities. Good luck to Bocky. Very, very well done to those brain surgeon veterinarians. You've been watching The World Today with me, Maryam Moshiri. After a short break, I'll be back with the top headlines. Do stay with us on BBC News. It's 7 p.m. in London. This is The World Today with Maryam Moshiri. President Putin says Russia agrees to a ceasefire in Ukraine, but says the conflict will only end if its root causes are addressed.
This ceasefire should lead to an enduring peace and should remove the root causes of this crisis.
His comments come as President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, arrives in Moscow for talks. President Trump says the signals are promising.
A lot of the details of a final agreement have actually been discussed. Now we're going to see whether or not Russia's there, and if they're not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world.
In other news, Sir Keir Starmer announces plans to scrap NHS England. It's the body which runs the health service. Also coming up on The World Today, a brown bear which had life-saving brain surgery last October has emerged, looking happy and healthy from semi-hibernation. Hello and welcome to The World Today on BBC News. President Trump has welcomed what he called a promising statement from Vladimir Putin on a possible ceasefire with Ukraine. It's after the Russian leader said he backed the idea, but added the conflict can only end if what he called its root causes were addressed. Still to come on The World Today. Questions over the safety of millions of children who play Roblox, one of the world's biggest gaming platforms. We hear from its boss. And an American influencer could be in trouble in Australia after filming herself taking a baby wombat from its mother. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. It's described by the UK government as the world's biggest quango, NHS England. Well, now the Prime Minister has announced that it's being scrapped. In a speech in Hull, Sir Keir Starmer said the move was aimed at bringing the NHS and decisions about how to spend £200 billion a year. Let's just bring you some breaking news from President Zelensky. He's reacted to President Putin's response. Remember, we told you President Putin said that the fighting with Ukraine must end, but added that it should lead to an enduring peace and remove the underlying causes of this crisis. President Zelensky saying that President Putin's response to the ceasefire proposal is manipulative and rejects his preconditions. What we've heard from Russia are Putin's very predictable and very manipulative words, Mr. Zelensky said in an evening video address. In practice, he's preparing a rejection. We'll have more analysis of all of that here on The World Today after this short break. Do stay with us. You're watching The World Today on BBC News. The latest headlines. President Putin says Russia agrees to a ceasefire in Ukraine, but stresses there are nuances. His comments come as President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, arrived in Moscow for talks. Mr. Trump says the signals are promising.
A lot of the details of a final agreement have actually been discussed. Now we're going to see whether or not Russia's there, and if they're not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world.
Well, G7 foreign ministers are meeting in Canada for 3 days of talks dominated by Ukraine and President Trump's trade tariffs. Well, let's just bring you up to date with some more lines coming into us from President Zelensky. He's been giving his nightly address and he's been responding to those latest words from President Putin. Remember, earlier on, President Putin responded in a press conference. Still to come on The World Today, an ever longer wait for 2 astronauts stranded on the International Space Station after the cancellation of a SpaceX flight minutes before it was due to blast off. And an American influencer could be in big trouble in Australia after filming herself taking a baby wombat from its mother. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. an attempt to send replacement crew to the International Space Station to relieve 2 US astronauts who have been stranded there, believe it or not, since all the way back in June has now been postponed. Really bad luck for them. An issue with the launch pad prompted officials at the well-known Space Centre. That's Liz Cabrera-Holtz from World Animal Protection there. Now, a good story, or a good news story. A brown bear, which had life-saving brain surgery last October, has emerged from semi-hibernation with his keepers saying he looks happy and healthy. Bocky, who lives at Wildwood Trust near Canterbury, have been suffering from seizures. Francis Reid has the story. OK, Sheila, it's been so lovely to speak to you. Thank you very much. And to all of you who are waking up at 5 a.m. to watch the lunar eclipse, the best of luck. That's it from me and the team. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching The World Today on BBC News.
Hello, it's been another rather cold day. Nothing unusual for this time of year, but